My husband drugged me at my own father's funeral and had me committed to a psychiatric ward so he could steal my £12 million inheritance. His mistress moved into my mansion. His mother had the judge declare me mentally incompetent. They threw a party to celebrate. But what they didn't know was that I was never crazy. I was planning. And the lawyer reading my father's will had one final clause they never saw coming. By the time I walked out of that hospital 6 months later, I'd already destroyed them. Completely, legally, brilliantly. Before this story begins, smash that subscribe button because what you're about to hear is the most satisfying takedown you'll ever witness. This is about betrayal, stolen millions, and revenge so calculated it became legendary. Don't you dare skip ahead. Every single second matters. Now let me tell you how I buried them all. My name is Charlotte Ashford, and the day my father died, I became worth £12 million. 24 hours later, my husband had me locked in a psychiatric hospital. 48 hours after that, he'd moved his 23-year-old mistress into my family estate. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It started at the funeral. St. Michael's Cathedral in Kensington, packed with 400 people who'd come to mourn Sir Richard Ashford, banking magnate, philanthropist, my father. I stood at the front in my black Chanel dress, my husband Marcus beside me in his bespoke Tom Ford suit, playing the supportive spouse while my world crumbled. The service was beautiful. Classical music, white roses, eulogies from people who actually knew my father. Marcus squeezed my hand at appropriate moments, whispered, "You're doing great, darling," when I dabbed my eyes. The perfect husband. At the wake held at Ashford Manor, the sprawling Cotswolds estate I'd grown up in, Marcus stayed close, bringing me tea, fielding condolences, being attentive in a way he hadn't been in months. I should have known something was wrong. Marcus was never attentive unless he wanted something. "Drink this, Charlotte," he said, handing me a cup of Earl Grey around 3 p.m. "You've barely eaten. The sugar will help." I drank it. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband of 7 years. The man I'd put through business school. The man I'd introduced to my father's social circle. The man who'd promised to love me forever in a ceremony at this very estate. 20 minutes later, the room started spinning. The faces of mourners blurred together like a watercolor painting left in the rain. I tried to tell Marcus something was wrong, but my tongue felt thick, my words slurred. "Charlotte's having a breakdown," I heard Marcus announce loudly. "The grief is too much. I need to get her upstairs." Strong hands gripped my arms. Marcus and someone else, his mother Vivian, I realized dimly, practically carried me up the grand staircase while guests whispered in concern below. "Poor thing, losing her father like that. She hasn't been well for months, you know? Marcus has been so patient with her episodes." Episodes? What episodes? I wanted to scream that I'd never had episodes, that something was very wrong, that the tea had tasted bitter. But my body wouldn't cooperate. My legs buckled. The world went dark at the edges. The last thing I heard clearly before unconsciousness took me was Vivian's voice, cold and satisfied. "Phase 1 complete. Call Dr. Whitmore. Tell him the patient is experiencing a psychotic break and needs immediate sectioning." When I woke up 6 hours later, I was in a locked psychiatric ward at Hartwell Private Hospital, strapped to a bed, with a doctor I'd never met telling me I'd tried to attack my husband at my father's funeral. That's when I knew. Marcus had drugged me, staged a breakdown, and now he was going to take everything. But what Marcus didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my father had seen this coming. Every single move. And he'd left me the ultimate weapon hidden in his will. All I had to do was survive long enough to use it. Dr. Edmund Whitmore had a face like a funeral director, professionally sympathetic with dead eyes. He sat across from me in the consultation room, which was really just a locked office with reinforced windows, studying me over his wire-rimmed glasses like I was a particularly interesting lab specimen. "Mrs. Ashford, do you know where you are?" "Hartwell Private Hospital," I said clearly. Psychiatric wing. I was brought here against my will after my husband drugged me. Dr. Whitmore made a note. That's when I learned that in psychiatric hospitals, everything you say that contradicts their narrative becomes proof you're unwell. Truth becomes delusion. Fighting back becomes aggression. Fear becomes paranoia. Your husband reports you've been experiencing paranoid delusions for several months, Whitmore said. Accusations that he's having an affair. Belief that people are plotting against you. Emotional volatility. Yesterday at your father's funeral, you became violent and had to be restrained. That's a lie. My voice stayed calm even as panic clawed at my chest. I never became violent. Marcus drugged my tea. Check my blood. You'll find. Mrs. Ashford, aggression toward your spouse is documented in your husband's diary entries going back 4 months. He's been desperately trying to get you help, but you've refused. Yesterday's incident was the final straw. Diary entries. Marcus had been building a case against me for 4 months, since right after my father's cancer diagnosis. Since the moment he'd known Sir Richard Ashford was dying and his daughter would inherit everything. I want to see my solicitor, I said. Thomas Fairfax. Your husband has already contacted Mr. Fairfax. He agrees that treatment is the priority right now. Legal matters can wait until you're stable. A chill ran down my spine. Thomas Fairfax had been my father's solicitor for 30 years. He'd known me since I was 8 years old. If Marcus had gotten to him, convinced him I was genuinely unwell, how long am I being held here? That depends entirely on your progress, Whitmore said, which was psychiatric speak for, as long as we want. Your husband has signed a 28-day assessment order. After that, we'll evaluate whether you need continued care. 28 days. For weeks. Long enough for Marcus to do whatever he planned with my inheritance. I'm not insane, I said quietly, and you know it. How much is my husband paying you, Dr. Whitmore? His expression didn't change. That kind of paranoid accusation is exactly what we're here to address, Mrs. Ashford. I'm prescribing olanzapine to help with the delusions and lorazepam for anxiety. Nurse Patterson will bring them shortly. Antipsychotics. Once they got me on medication, they could point to the prescription as proof I was genuinely ill. And if I refused the medication, they'd note patient is non-compliant with treatment, which would extend my stay indefinitely. I was trapped. Utterly, completely trapped. That night, lying on the narrow hospital bed with its scratchy sheets and the constant fluorescent hum, I could hear other patients screaming down the hall. This ward was where wealthy families disappeared inconvenient relatives. I'd read about places like this, private facilities where the staff could be bought, where assessments could be manipulated, where people went insane and came out broken. But I wasn't going to break, because I had something Marcus didn't know about. My father had been paranoid about gold diggers his entire life. When I'd introduced him to Marcus 7 years ago, he'd hired private investigators. Run background checks. Had Marcus followed for months. He'd never found anything concrete. Marcus was too careful, but he'd never trusted him either. So when my father had updated his will 2 months before he died, when the cancer had already spread to his bones and he'd known his time was short, he'd added special provisions, protection clauses, contingencies that his solicitor Thomas Fairfax had helped him design. The problem was, I didn't know what those provisions were. My father had only told me one thing during our final conversation in his private room at the hospice, his voice weak but urgent. Charlotte, if anything happens to you after I'm gone, if Marcus tries anything, trust the will. Everything you need is in the will. The will reading was scheduled for 1 week after the funeral, 6 days from now. If I was still locked in here, Marcus would attend alone as my concerned husband and learn exactly what he was inheriting. Unless I could get out, unless I could prove I wasn't insane, unless I could contact someone on the outside who would believe me. The next morning, they brought the medications. I pretended to swallow them but held the pills under my tongue. spitting them out later. I couldn't afford to have my mind clouded. I needed to be sharp, focused, ready, because Marcus had made one critical mistake. He'd underestimated me, thought I was just the sheltered heiress, the daddy's girl who'd never had to fight for anything. He didn't know that my father had spent my entire childhood teaching me how to survive in a world full of predators, how to read people, how to plan, how to strike back. Marcus wanted to play games with my sanity and my inheritance? Fine, let's play. But by the time this game was over, he'd learned that the most dangerous opponent is the one everyone underestimates. And I was about to remind him exactly who my father was and what he'd taught me. The psychiatric ward had one small mercy: access to newspapers. Every morning at 8 a.m., a board attendant wheeled a cart through the common room with tea, digestive biscuits, and a selection of dailies. Most patients ignored them, too medicated or too far gone to care about the outside world. I read every single one, cover to cover. On day 3 of my imprisonment, I found what I was looking for on page 7 of the Daily Mail Society section. A photograph that made my blood run cold and my resolve turn to steel. The headline read, "Banking heir Marcus Ashford comforts family friend after tragic loss." The photo showed Marcus standing in the doorway of Ashford Manor, my childhood home, my inheritance, my sanctuary. With his arm around a young woman I recognized immediately. Sienna Hartley, 23 years old, my former personal assistant, the girl I'd hired 8 months ago to help manage my charitable foundation work. The girl who'd been sleeping with my husband for at least 6 of those months. In the photo, Sienna wore one of my Valentino dresses, my diamond earrings, my life. The caption explained that Miss Hartley had been a close family friend staying at the estate to help Mr. Ashford manage affairs, while his wife recovered from her tragic breakdown. It quoted Marcus, "Charlotte would want the house filled with warmth during this difficult time. Sienna has been an absolute angel, helping me cope with both Sir Richard's death and Charlotte's illness." I stared at that photo until the newspaper crumpled in my shaking hands. Not because I was heartbroken. I'd known about the affair for 2 months, had found the hotel receipts, the deleted texts recovered from the cloud. No, I was shaking with pure, incandescent rage. He'd moved his mistress into my family home before I'd been committed for a week, dressed her in my clothes, paraded her in front of society as the angel helping him cope. "Everything all right, Charlotte?" Nurse Patterson's voice made me jump. She was the younger nurse, mid-30s, less jaded than the others. Sometimes I caught her watching me with something that might have been doubt, as if she wasn't entirely convinced I belonged here. "Fine," I said, smoothing out the paper. "Just reading about my husband's close family friend." Nurse Patterson glanced at the article, and something flickered across her face. Recognition, disapproval, maybe, but she said nothing, just continued her rounds. I spent the rest of the day in the common room, behaving perfectly, taking my medications or pretending to, participating in group therapy, showing improvement. Dr. Whitmore needed to see a compliant patient, someone who was responding to treatment. If I fought, I'd be here for months. If I played along, I might get privileges, phone calls, visitors, a chance. That night, I did something I hadn't done since I was a child. I prayed, not to God. My father had raised me to believe in evidence and strategy, not faith. No, I prayed to my father's memory. "You saw this coming, didn't you?" I whispered into the darkness of my room. "You knew Marcus was circling like a shark. That's why you updated the will. That's why you told me to trust it. So I'm trusting it, Dad. I'm trusting you. Just give me a sign. Tell me how to fight back." The answer came the next morning in the most unexpected way. During breakfast, another patient shuffled over to my table. Margaret Winters, late 60s, admitted 3 months ago by her son who wanted her oceanfront property. She rarely spoke, heavily medicated most days. But this morning, her eyes were clearer than usual. "You're the Ashford girl," she said. Not a question. Yes. Your father was Richard Ashford. The banker. Yes. Margaret leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper. I knew your father. 20 years ago, my husband did business with him. Richard Ashford was the smartest man I ever met. Paranoid as hell, but smart. He didn't trust anyone. My heart started pounding. Did he ever talk about protecting his family? Protected everything, Margaret said. Had backup plans for his backup plans. Used to say, Margaret, if you're ever in trouble, make sure your solicitor isn't the only one who knows your secrets. Always have a fail-safe. Fail-safe. Of course, my father would have had a fail-safe. Mrs. Winters, do you remember anything else? Anything specific? But Margaret's moment of clarity was fading. The medication was pulling her back under. Solicitor. Not the only one, she murmured, then shuffled away. I sat there, my mind racing. If Thomas Fairfax, the solicitor, had been compromised, convinced I was genuinely ill or potentially paid off by Marcus, then my father would have made sure someone else knew the truth. Someone else had information. But who? I thought back to my father's final weeks. The parade of visitors to his hospice room. Business associates. Old friends. His accountant, Gerald Chun, who'd managed the Ashford fortune for 15 years. His private secretary, Mrs. Eleanor Harding, who'd worked for him since before I was born. Eleanor, of course. Eleanor Harding knew everything about my father's business. She'd been his gatekeeper, his confidant, the woman who'd organized every detail of his life. If anyone had information beyond what was in the official will, it would be Eleanor. The problem was reaching her. I had no phone privileges yet. No visitors except Marcus, who'd come once to play the concerned husband in front of Dr. Whitmore. All my communication was monitored. Unless, that afternoon during recreational time, I approached Nurse Patterson in the hallway, away from the security cameras. I need to make a phone call, I said quietly. Not to my husband, to my father's secretary. It's about estate matters that need immediate attention. You know I can't let you do that, Charlotte. Not without Dr. Whitmore's approval. Please. I looked her directly in the eyes. You saw the article, didn't you? The one about Marcus and the family friend living in my house. You know something isn't right here. Nurse Patterson bit her lip. Even if I thought, look, I could lose my job. My father died 2 weeks ago, leaving me £12 million. If you help me make one phone call, just one, I'll make sure you're compensated. Generously, legally. Once I'm out of here. She studied my face for a long moment. What do you think is really happening here, Charlotte? I think my husband had me committed so he could steal my inheritance. I think Dr. Whitmore is being paid to keep me here. And I think if I don't get out soon, I'll be declared mentally incompetent and lose everything my father built. Nurse Patterson was quiet for so long I thought she'd refuse. Then, tomorrow, 2 a.m., during my night shift, 5 minutes. That's all I can give you. Relief flooded through me. Thank you. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet, she said. If this goes wrong, we're both finished. But it wouldn't go wrong. Couldn't. Because tomorrow at 2 a.m., I was going to make the phone call that would start dismantling Marcus's perfect plan. One piece at a time, starting with the one person who knew all my father's secrets. Eleanor Harding was about to become my secret weapon. At 2:17 a.m. on day 5 of my imprisonment, Nurse Patterson led me to the staff office with shaking hands and a borrowed mobile phone. Don't thank me yet. We have 2 days to get you out, and to that we'll reading. And Charlotte, when Professor Chun asks you questions, tell the truth. All of it, including the affair, the drugging, everything. He needs to understand what's really happening. I will. One more thing, Eleanor said. At the will reading, say nothing until Thomas finishes. Don't react, don't argue, don't engage with Marcus no matter what he says. Just let the will speak. Your father wrote it for exactly this scenario. Trust it. The door handle rattled. Nurse Patterson's urgent whisper. Someone's coming. I have to go, I said quickly. Eleanor. I'll see you in 2 days, Charlotte. At Fairfax and Associates. 10 a.m. sharp. Be there. The line went dead. I shoved the phone at Patterson just as footsteps echoed in the corridor. We slipped out of the office and back toward the ward. My heart pounding so hard I thought it would wake the other patients. Professor Chun was coming. Tomorrow. My father's failsafe. I just had to survive one more day without taking the medications that would cloud my mind. One more day of pretending to be the compliant patient while Marcus thought he was winning. Because in 2 days, everything would change. In 2 days, Marcus would walk into that while reading expecting to claim £12 million. Instead, he'd discover that you don't steal from Richard Ashford's daughter without consequences. And those consequences were about to be spectacular. Back in my room, I lay in the dark and thought about my father. About all the times he'd seemed overly cautious, overly suspicious of people's motives. I thought he was just being paranoid. Turned out he'd been right all along. He'd known Marcus was a threat, had probably known from the beginning, and he'd spent his final weeks building a trap so elaborate that even from beyond the grave, he was protecting me. I won't let you down, Dad, I whispered into the darkness. I'll be at that reading, and I'll finish what you started. Tomorrow, Professor Chun would come. Tomorrow, I'd tell him everything. Tomorrow, the first piece of Marcus's perfect plan would start to crumble. And by the time Marcus realized what was happening, it would be too late. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. Professor David Chun arrived at 10:30 a.m. on day 6, exactly as Eleanor had promised. I was in the common room pretending to do a jigsaw puzzle when Nurse Patterson came to collect me, her expression carefully neutral. Charlotte, you have a visitor. Dr. Whitmore's office. My pulse jumped, but I kept my face calm. Is it my husband? No. A Professor Chen from the Royal College. Something about an independent assessment. I could have kissed her. Instead, I nodded and followed her down the corridor, past the locked doors and the patients who stared with empty eyes, to Dr. Whitmore's office where 2 men waited. Dr. Whitmore looked distinctly uncomfortable, his usual professional calm fractured. Professor Chun was his opposite, late 60s, warm eyes behind silver-rimmed glasses, an aura of competent authority that filled the room. Mrs. Ashford, Professor Chun said, extending his hand. Thank you for agreeing to speak with me. I'm Professor David Chun from the Royal College of Psychiatry. I've been asked to conduct an independent assessment of your current situation. I shook his hand, noting the strong grip, the direct gaze. This was a man used to seeing through lies. Asked by whom? Dr. Whitmore interjected, his voice tight. I wasn't informed of any review request. By the late Sir Richard Ashford, Professor Chun said calmly, producing a document. 6 weeks before his death, Sir Richard engaged my services to conduct an independent psychiatric review of his daughter should she ever be committed to any facility within 6 months of his passing. This agreement was filed with the Royal College and is legally binding. You'll find all the necessary authorization here. Whitmore's face went pale as he scanned the document. This is highly irregular, but entirely legal, Chen replied. Sir Richard was very thorough. Now, if you'll excuse us, I need to conduct a private assessment. Medical ethics. I'm sure you understand. For a moment, I thought Whitmore would refuse. But arguing with the Royal College would raise questions he couldn't afford to answer. He stood stiffly. Of course. I'll be right outside should you need anything. As soon as the door closed, Professor Chen's warm demeanor sharpened into something more penetrating. He gestured for me to sit, then took the chair opposite rather than behind the desk, a deliberate choice to reduce the power dynamic. Charlotte. May I call you Charlotte? Please. I want to be very clear about something. Your father was a friend, yes, but that doesn't mean I'll falsify an assessment. If I believe you're genuinely unwell, I'll say so. My job is to find the truth, not to simply release you. Do you understand? I understand. And I want the truth too. Good. He pulled out a tablet. Let's start with the basics. Do you know why you're here? Because my husband drugged me at my father's funeral, staged a breakdown, and had me committed so he could steal my inheritance. Chen's expression didn't change. That's quite an accusation. Can you walk me through what happened? Start with the funeral. So I did. I told him everything. The tea that tasted bitter. The sudden onset of symptoms. Waking up strapped to a bed. The manufactured diary entries Marcus had supposedly been keeping for months. The society page photo of Sienna in my dress. The convenient timing, funeral on Monday, committed by Tuesday, will reading scheduled for 8 days later. Professor Chun asked targeted questions, taking notes, his face revealing nothing. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. These diary entries Dr. Whitmore mentioned, have you seen them? No. Marcus apparently showed them to Whitmore, but I've never been given copies. Convenient, since they're probably forged. And the alleged violent incident at the funeral. Were there witnesses? Only Marcus's mother, Vivian. Everyone else at the wake saw me being helped upstairs. I was drugged, not violent. But by the time I could speak clearly, I was already here and Marcus had established the narrative. What about before the funeral? Dr. Whitmore's notes mention 4 months of erratic behavior, paranoid accusations, mood swings, all fabricated. Professor, I'd be happy to give you access to my medical records, my GP's notes, statements from friends. Up until the day of the funeral, I was functioning perfectly normally. I was grieving my father's terminal diagnosis. Yes, but there's a substantial difference between grief and psychosis. Chun made a note. And this Mistress, Sienna Hartley. How long have you known about the affair? 2 months. I found hotel receipts in March. Recovered deleted messages from our shared cloud storage. I was planning to divorce Marcus after the funeral. After my father, I didn't want Dad's last weeks consumed with that drama. Did you confront Marcus about the affair? No. I was documenting everything, building a case. I'd already consulted a divorce solicitor privately. I was going to file the week after the funeral. Professor Chun looked up from his tablet, his eyes sharp. So Marcus knew his marriage was ending and that he'd lose access to your inheritance. Exactly. And 5 days after I found the evidence, my father updated his will. I didn't know that until recently, but the timing suggests Dad might have known about Marcus too. Did your father tell you he'd updated the will? He told me to trust the will if anything happened to me after he died. That everything I needed was in the will. Nothing more specific. Chun was quiet again, thinking. Then, Charlotte, I'm going to ask you some standard diagnostic questions. They may seem obvious, but I need to document baseline cognitive function. What day is today? Thursday, May 9th, 2024. Who is the Prime Minister? I answered correctly. He asked me to count backward from 100 by 7s, to recall 3 unrelated words after a 5-minute delay, to interpret a proverb. Standard cognitive testing that I passed easily. No signs of confusion, disorientation, or cognitive impairment, he murmured, making notes. Charlotte, I'm going to be frank with you. Based on this interview, I see no evidence of psychosis, delusions, or any condition that would require involuntary commitment. You're grieving, certainly, angry, understandably, but grief and anger aren't mental illnesses. Relief crashed over me like a wave. So you'll release me? I'm going to do better than that. I'm going to file a report with the Royal College stating that you've been wrongfully committed and recommending immediate release. I'm also going to report Dr. Whitmore for potential ethics violations. If he accepted payment from your husband to falsify a diagnosis, that's grounds for losing his license. How long will the release take? Given the circumstances and my standing with the college, I can have you out by this afternoon. But Charlotte, once you're released, your husband will know. He'll realize his plan has failed. Good, I said. Let him know. The will reading is tomorrow. I'll be there. Professor Chun studied me with something that might have been admiration. Your father said you were brilliant. He worried people underestimated you because you were quiet. He said that was their mistake. My throat tightened. He taught me everything, including how to recognize a predator. Then use those lessons tomorrow. Richard told me once that the key to defeating an enemy isn't strength. It's patience. Let them think they're winning until the moment you spring the trap. Is that what's in the will? A trap? I don't know the contents, Chun said. But knowing your father? Absolutely. He was the most strategically minded person I ever met. If he told you to trust the will, then that's exactly what you should do. He stood, extending his hand again. I'll file the paperwork now. A car will collect you at 4 p.m. Where would you like to go? I assume not back to Ashford Manor. The Connaught Hotel in Mayfair. I'll call ahead. And Professor, thank you. You saved my life. I simply told the truth. But you're welcome. Now, let's go inform Dr. Whitmore that his patient is being released. I suspect he won't take it well. He was right. When Professor Chen delivered the news, Whitmore's professional mask cracked completely. This is absurd. Mrs. Ashford is clearly delusional. She's made wild accusations against her husband. She's made allegations that can be investigated, Chun corrected. And if they're true, you've participated in false imprisonment and fraud. I suggest you cooperate fully with any inquiries. Doctor, good day. By 4 p.m., I walked out of Hartwell Private Hospital wearing the clothes I'd been committed in, carrying nothing but my handbag. Nurse Patterson was waiting by the door. Good luck tomorrow, she whispered. Make him pay for what he did. Count on it, I said. The car took me to the Connaught, where I checked in using my personal credit card. Thankfully, Marcus hadn't thought to cancel it yet. I showered for the first time in 6 days, washing away the institutional smell, the humiliation, the fear. Then I called Eleanor Harding. I'm out, I said when she answered. Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. I'll be there. Thank God, Eleanor breathed. Charlotte, I should warn you. Marcus has been calling Thomas's office daily. He knows the reading is tomorrow. He'll be there. Perfect. I want to see his face when the trap springs. Charlotte, I don't know everything your father put in that will, but I know it's unconventional. Just remember what I told you. Don't react. Let Thomas read it all. Let Marcus think he's won right up until the moment he realizes he's lost. I will. Eleanor, thank you for everything. For believing me. Your father would have killed me if I didn't, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Now get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be quite a day. I hung up and stood at the window of my hotel room, looking out over London. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably celebrating. Probably thought he'd won. Had probably already spent my inheritance in his mind. Tomorrow, he'd learn that you can't con a con artist's daughter. Tomorrow, he'd discover exactly what my father had left me. And tomorrow, I'd finally get my revenge. I arrived at Fairfax & Associates at 9:45 a.m., 15 minutes early, wearing the Armani suit I'd bought that morning. Black, severe, powerful, the kind of armor my father had taught me to wear into battle. Eleanor Harding was waiting in the lobby. She stood when she saw me, her eyes filling with tears. Oh, Charlotte, thank God you're all right. She hugged me tightly, and for a moment I let myself be the grieving daughter rather than the avenging heiress. Then I pulled back, straightened my shoulders, and nodded. Is he here yet? Upstairs, with Vivian and that girl. They've been here since 9:30, probably couldn't wait. Eleanor's voice dripped with contempt. Thomas is ready. Are you? More than ready. We took the elevator to the third floor where Fairfax and Associates occupied a suite of elegant offices overlooking Lincoln's Inn Fields. Thomas Fairfax's secretary showed us to the conference room, all dark wood paneling, leather chairs, and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with legal tomes. Marcus sat at the far end of the long table, Vivian on his right, Sienna on his left, wearing another one of my dresses, the green Dior this time. She had the decency to look uncomfortable when I entered. Marcus did not. His face went through a fascinating progression of emotions in 3 seconds flat. Shock, confusion, then a carefully manufactured delight that didn't reach his eyes. "Charlotte, darling." He stood, coming toward me with open arms like we were reuniting lovers rather than predator and prey. "Dr. Whitmore called yesterday, said you'd been released. I was so worried when you left without telling me. Are you all right? Should you even be here? This must be so stressful." "Sit down, Marcus," I said calmly, taking a seat near Thomas Fairfax's chair. Eleanor sat beside me like a bodyguard. Marcus's smile faltered. "Darling, I know you've been unwell, but perhaps you should let me handle the legal matters until you're stronger." I said, "Sit down." The room went silent. Vivian's eyes narrowed. Sienna looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. Marcus slowly returned to his seat, his mask of concern slipping just enough to show the calculation underneath. Thomas Fairfax entered, a slim leather portfolio under his arm. He was 70, white-haired, with the sharp eyes of a man who'd spent 50 years reading between legal lines. He'd known my father since Oxford. If anyone could deliver my father's final message perfectly, it was Thomas. "Thank you all for coming," Thomas said, settling into his chair and opening the portfolio. "We're here for the reading of Sir Richard Ashford's last will and testament, updated on March 15th of this year, 6 weeks before his death. Before we begin, I need to confirm that all required parties are present." He looked directly at me. "Charlotte Victoria Ashford, daughter and primary beneficiary? Present. Marcus James Ashford, son-in-law? Present," Marcus said, already relaxing. He thought being named meant he'd get something. "Full. Excellent. Then let's proceed." Thomas put on his reading glasses. "I, Sir Richard Ashford, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, superseding all previous versions." Standard opening. Marcus was practically vibrating with anticipation. "To my beloved daughter Charlotte Victoria Ashford, I leave the entirety of my estate, including but not limited to Ashford Manor and all properties. The full portfolio of investments currently valued at £11.8 million. All business holdings, personal effects, vehicles, artwork, and jewelry." Marcus's smile grew wider. As my husband, he'd have access to all of it. Community property. That's what he was thinking. Thomas continued reading. "However, this bequest comes with the following conditions and protections." Marcus's smile froze. "First," Thomas read, his voice steady and clear, "I hereby establish the Ashford Family Trust, into which all assets shall be placed. Charlotte Victoria Ashford is named as the sole beneficiary and trustee. These assets cannot be accessed, borrowed against, or transferred without her explicit written consent, which cannot be provided under duress, coercion, or mental impairment as determined by an independent psychiatric review." The color drained from Marcus's face. "Second, I have reviewed the prenuptial agreement signed prior to Charlotte's marriage to Marcus James Ashford. Said agreement explicitly states that in the event of divorce, Marcus Ashford has no claim to any assets Charlotte brought into the marriage or inherited during the marriage. This includes the entire estate." "Now wait just a..." Marcus started to stand. "Let him finish," I said quietly. Marcus sat back down, his jaw clenched. Thomas glanced at me with something that might have been approval, then continued. "Third, I hereby acknowledge that I have received credible evidence suggesting Marcus James Ashford has engaged in marital infidelity with one Sienna Hartley, employed as Charlotte's personal assistant. Sienna made a small gasping sound. Vivian's hand shot out to grip Marcus's arm. Furthermore, Thomas read, his voice taking on a harder edge, I have received evidence that Marcus Ashford has been systematically planning to gain access to Charlotte's inheritance through potential manipulation of her mental state, including but not limited to manufactured evidence of psychiatric distress. The room exploded. This is outrageous, Vivian shouted. Richard was paranoid and senile when he wrote this. Mrs. Ashford, I must ask you to remain silent or I'll have you removed, Thomas said coldly. He looked at Marcus. Would you like me to continue? Marcus's face had gone from pale to red. Richard was out of his mind. He was dying on morphine, probably hallucinating. Sir Richard was evaluated by 3 independent physicians before signing this will, Thomas interrupted. All confirmed he was of completely sound mind. Now, may I continue? Or should I simply skip to the part about the criminal investigation? That shut everyone up. Criminal investigation? I asked innocently. Thomas looked at me, and there was the faintest hint of a smile. Yes, your father, anticipating the possibility of foul play after his death, hired a private investigation firm to monitor Marcus's activities for the 3 months prior to his death and for 6 months after. This investigation has been ongoing. The findings are extensive. He pulled out a second document. Bank records showing Marcus Ashford paid Dr. Edmund Whitmore £25,000 on the day Charlotte was committed to Hartwell Hospital. Hotel records confirming the affair with Miss Hartley. Text messages recovered from cloud storage showing Marcus and his mother Vivian discussing plans to take control of Charlotte's assets. Ensure she's not a problem. Oh, Dad, you beautiful, paranoid genius. There's more, Thomas continued. The investigators also recovered evidence that Marcus drugged Charlotte at the funeral. The teacup she drank from was retrieved from the manor before the caterers cleared it. Forensic testing confirmed the presence of rohypnol and diazepam in concentrations sufficient to cause exactly the symptoms Charlotte experienced. Marcus was on his feet now. This is entrapment, illegal surveillance. None of this would hold up in court, Thomas finished. Actually, it would, because your father also arranged for this evidence to be delivered to the Metropolitan Police this morning. They're reviewing charges of conspiracy to defraud, false imprisonment, and poisoning. Detective Inspector Morrison from the fraud squad is actually waiting downstairs to speak with you, Marcus. I told him to give us 30 minutes to finish the reading first. The trap had sprung. Completely. Perfectly. I watched Marcus's world disintegrate in real time. But the will, Vivian said desperately. Surely Charlotte's husband has some rights. The prenuptial agreement is ironclad, Thomas said. I should know. I wrote it. At Sir Richard's insistence, I might add. He never trusted you, Marcus. From the very beginning. And it seems he was right not to. I finally spoke. Marcus, do you remember what you said when you brought me that tea at the funeral? You said, drink this, Charlotte. You've barely eaten. The sugar will help. I remember every word, because I wasn't unconscious during your staged breakdown. I was paralyzed by the drugs you gave me, but I heard everything, including when your mother said, Phase 1 complete. Marcus stared at me like I was a ghost, which in a way I was, the ghost of the wife he'd tried to bury. You had me committed? I continued, my voice steady and cold. You moved your mistress into my home. You wore my father's death like a costume to play the grieving son-in-law. You thought I was the weak one, the easy target, the sheltered heiress who'd never fight back. I stood, placing my hands on the table, leaning forward. You forgot who my father was, and what he taught me. The door opened. 2 men in suits entered, showing police identification. Marcus Ashford? The lead detective said. I'm Detective Inspector Morrison. We'd like you to come with us to answer some questions about the events of May 3rd. Marcus looked at me, and for the first time I saw real fear in his eyes. "Charlotte, please. I made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can." "The only mistake," I said, "was mine. I married you, but Dad fixed that mistake for me. With his will, his investigators, and his beautiful, perfect trap that you walked right into." As they led Marcus out in handcuffs, Vivian hissing threats about lawyers, Sienna crying into her hands, I sat back down. Thomas cleared his throat. "There is one final provision in the will. Sir Richard left a personal letter for you, Charlotte, to be delivered after the will reading." He handed me an envelope with my father's handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. "My dearest Charlotte, if you're reading this, then my fears were justified and Marcus showed his true colors. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from the pain of betrayal, but I could at least ensure he wouldn't profit from it. You asked me once why I was so paranoid about money. This is why. Money doesn't just attract love, it attracts predators. And the most dangerous predators are the ones who pretend to love you. I've left you everything, but more importantly, I've left you free. Free of Marcus, free of anyone who would use you, free to live the life you choose. Be brilliant, be strong, be careful who you trust, but most of all, be happy. I love you forever, Dad." I folded the letter carefully, tears streaming down my face. Eleanor put her arm around my shoulders. "He really did think of everything," I whispered. "He always did," Eleanor said. "Now, what would you like to do first?" I wiped my eyes and looked at Thomas. "First, I want divorce papers filed immediately. Second, I want every lock changed at Ashford Manor by tonight. Third, I want Sienna Hartley removed from my property and sued for theft of the items she's wearing. And fourth," I smiled, and it felt good. "Fourth, I want to plan a party, a real party, to celebrate my freedom." Thomas actually laughed. "Your father would be very proud." "I know," I said. "I know he would be." The will reading was over. The trap had sprung. And Marcus's plan to steal my inheritance had ended with him in handcuffs instead of counting millions. But this wasn't the end of the story. This was just the beginning of making him pay for every single thing he'd done. And I was going to enjoy every minute of it. The arrest of Marcus Ashford made the front page of every major newspaper in Britain. Banking heir arrested in inheritance fraud scheme. Husband drugged wife to steal £12 million. Sir Richard Ashford's posthumous revenge. The society pages that had portrayed Marcus as the devoted husband were now savaging him as a calculating con artist. I watched it all from the safety of Ashford Manor, which I'd reclaimed exactly 6 hours after the will reading. I'd arrived with a locksmith, 2 security guards, and a lawyer. Sienna had exactly 30 minutes to gather her personal belongings and leave. Everything else, my dresses, my jewelry, my life that she'd stolen, stayed. She'd cried, begged, tried to claim she didn't know what Marcus was planning. "You wore my Valentino dress the day after I was committed," I said coldly. "You posted photos in my home calling it a new chapter. You knew exactly what was happening. Get out of my house." Now, 3 days after the arrest, I sat in my father's study, my study now, reading through the full investigation report that his private investigators had compiled. It was devastating. Marcus hadn't just been planning this for months. He'd been planning it for years. The affair with Sienna had started 11 months ago, right after Dad's cancer diagnosis. Marcus had hired her specifically because she was young, impressionable, and easily manipulated. He'd fed her lies about our marriage, about how I was cold and controlling, about how he was trapped. But the affair was just one piece. The investigators had found evidence of Marcus accessing my personal files, photographing financial documents, researching psychiatric commitment laws. He'd consulted with 3 different doctors about symptoms of mental illness before finding Dr. Whitmore, the one corrupt enough to take a bribe. The diary entries he'd shown Whitmore as evidence of my erratic behavior, completely fabricated, written in one sitting the night before my father died. The investigators had found the original Word document on Marcus's laptop, complete with creation date. He'd thought of everything, or so he believed. What he hadn't counted on was my father being even more paranoid than he was greedy. Eleanor Harding sat across from me, reviewing another set of documents. She'd become my closest ally in the aftermath, helping me navigate the legal complexities of the estate and the criminal case against Marcus. The Crown Prosecution Service is moving forward with charges, she said. Conspiracy to defraud, false imprisonment, administering a noxious substance with intent to harm. Plus, Vivian is being charged as an accessory. They're both looking at serious prison time. How serious? Marcus could get 10 to 15 years if convicted. Vivian slightly less, but she'll definitely serve time. And Charlotte, there's something else. The CPS discovered that this wasn't Marcus's first attempt at an inheritance scam. I looked up sharply. What? Before he met you, Marcus was engaged to a woman named Rebecca Thornton. She came from money, not as much as you, but substantial. They'd been together for 2 years when Rebecca's father died suddenly. 3 weeks later, Rebecca was in a car accident. She survived, but was in a coma for 2 months. My blood ran cold. Let me guess, Marcus tried to access her money. He tried, but Rebecca's family was suspicious. They hired lawyers who blocked him at every turn. When Rebecca woke up, she had amnesia about the months leading up to the accident, but her family convinced her to break off the engagement. Marcus walked away with nothing. He's done this before, I said slowly. This is his pattern. Find a wealthy woman, get close, wait for a tragedy, then strike. Exactly. The CPS is now investigating whether the car accident was really an accident. If they can prove Marcus tampered with her vehicle, he could face attempted murder charges as well. I thought about Rebecca Thornton, whoever she was, how close she'd come to being in my position, how lucky she was that her family had been vigilant. I want to meet her, I said. Rebecca, if she's willing, I can arrange that. Charlotte, there's one more thing. Sienna Hartley has asked to speak with you. Absolutely not. She says she has information about Marcus, things that aren't in the investigation report. She's willing to testify against him if you'll agree to drop the civil suit for the stolen items. I considered this. Sienna was 23, naive, easily manipulated. Marcus had used her just like he'd tried to use me. Part of me wanted to destroy her for her role in this. But another part, the part that sounded like my father, knew that useful allies were more valuable than petty revenge. Set up a meeting, I said. But she comes here, and she brings every piece of information she has. If it's valuable enough, I'll consider dropping the civil suit. But Eleanor? I want her scared. I want her to understand exactly how close she came to being an accessory to fraud. I'll make the arrangements. That afternoon, I had another visitor. Nurse Patterson from Hartwell Hospital, looking nervous in the grand foyer of the manor. Mrs. Ashford, I'm sorry to come unannounced. I wanted to check that you were all right, and to apologize. Apologize for what? You helped me make the phone call that saved my life. I should have done more. Should have reported Dr. Whitmore earlier. I suspected something wasn't right from the beginning, but I was afraid of losing my job. I gestured for her to follow me to the sitting room. You did help me when it mattered most, and because of that, I'm going to help you. I'm funding an investigation into Hartwell Hospital. How many other patients have been wrongfully committed? How many other families have bribed Dr. Whitmore? This can't happen again. Patterson's eyes widened. That could shut down the entire facility. If the facility is corrupt, it should be shut down. And Nurse Patterson, Jennifer, isn't it? She nodded. When that investigation is complete, I'm going to need someone to help run a new program. Patient advocacy for wrongful commitment cases. Someone who understands the system from the inside. Someone brave enough to break the rules when it matters. Interested? Yes, absolutely yes. Good. My lawyers will be in touch. Now help me with something. I'm planning an event. A gala. Fundraiser for mental health advocacy and patient rights. I want to invite every journalist, every psychiatric professional, every person of influence in Britain. I want them to hear my story and understand how easy it is to weaponize the psychiatric system. That's brilliant, Jennifer said. When? 3 months. Gives me time to plan it perfectly. And Jennifer, I want you there, front and center. The nurse who saved the heiress. You're part of this story too. After she left, I stood at the window of the sitting room, looking out over the grounds where I'd played as a child. This house had always been my sanctuary. Marcus had tried to take it, tried to fill it with his mistress and his lies. But he'd failed, because my father had taught me the most important lesson. The best revenge isn't emotional. It's systematic, thorough, utterly devastating. Marcus had wanted my money. Instead, he got a prison sentence. He'd wanted my home. Instead, he got humiliation. He'd wanted me declared insane. Instead, he'd been exposed as the criminal. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. Because in 3 months at my gala, with every important person in Britain watching, I was going to tell my story. Every detail, every betrayal, every moment of terror in that hospital. And I was going to make sure that no one ever forgot Marcus Ashford's name, or what happens when you try to steal from Richard Ashford's daughter. The phone rang. Eleanor. Charlotte, Sienna Hartley is here tomorrow at 2 p.m. Are you ready? I smiled at my reflection in the window. Send her in when she arrives. Let's hear what she has to say. One more thing, Eleanor said. Rebecca Thornton called. She wants to meet you. This week, if you're available. Tell her yes. I think Rebecca and I have a lot to discuss. I think you're right. I hung up and prepared mentally for tomorrow. The girl who'd slept in my bed, worn my clothes, and helped Marcus try to steal my life was about to learn that forgiveness comes with a price. And I was about to collect. Sienna Hartley arrived at exactly 2 p.m. the next day, looking like she'd aged 5 years in 1 week. Her designer clothes were gone, replaced with jeans and a plain hoodie. No makeup, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen. I made her wait in the foyer for 15 minutes before Eleanor showed her into the drawing room where I sat in my father's favorite leather chair. A deliberate power play. Sit, I said, gesturing to the uncomfortable antique chair across from me. Sienna perched on the edge, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. Mrs. Ashford, thank you for seeing me. I know you have every reason to hate me. I don't hate you, Sienna, I interrupted. Hate requires caring. I simply want to hear what information you have. Eleanor said you're willing to testify against Marcus. Yes, I brought recordings. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone. I started recording our conversations about a month ago, after I realized he was lying about everything. This got my attention. What kind of recordings? Conversations where he talked about the plan, about you, about your father. Mrs. Ashford, there are things on here that aren't in the police reports. Things that prove this was worse than anyone knows. She pressed play on the first recording. Marcus's voice filled the room, slightly slurred from alcohol. The beauty of it is Charlotte will never see it coming. She's too trusting, too sheltered. Her father spoiled her, made her soft. Once he's gone, she'll be easy to manipulate. Sienna's voice on the recording. But what if she figures it out? Marcus laughed. She won't. And even if she does, who's going to believe her? I'll have medical records showing months of mental instability. Dr. Whitmore will testify she's delusional. Her own husband committed her, that's powerful evidence. By the time anyone questions it, I'll have moved enough money offshore that even if she gets out, she'll spend years in legal battles. What about her parents? What about them? They're 4 hours away. barely visited even when Richard was alive. They'll believe what I tell them. Everyone will. The recording continued with Marcus detailing his plan with casual cruelty. When it ended, Sienna pulled up another file. "This one is from 2 weeks before your father died," she whispered. It's bad, Mrs. Ashford." Marcus's voice again. "Mother found a doctor in Switzerland. £50,000, completely discreet. If the psychiatric route doesn't work, we have a backup plan." "What kind of backup plan?" Sienna asked on the recording. "An accident. Overdose of sleeping pills, maybe. Depressed widow. Couldn't cope with losing her father. It happens. The life insurance pays out either way, £2 million. And I inherit as her widower." My hands gripped the chair arms so tightly my knuckles went white. Eleanor stood behind me, her face pale. "They were going to kill you," Eleanor breathed. "If the commitment didn't work, they were going to murder you and make it look like suicide." Sienna was crying now. "I swear I didn't know about that part until I heard this recording. Marcus told me you were mentally ill, that he was trying to help you, that the commitment was for your own protection. But when I heard this," she gestured to the phone, "I realized he'd been lying about everything. That's when I started recording everything he said." "How many recordings do you have?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. 17. Different conversations over 3 weeks. All of them show premeditation, planning. And Mrs. Ashford, there's one more thing. She pulled out a piece of paper. "I found this in Vivian's handbag last week. I took a photo before she noticed. I looked at the document. A life insurance policy. On me. Taken out 6 months ago, right after my father's diagnosis. Beneficiary, Marcus James Ashford. Amount £2 million. They hadn't just planned to steal my inheritance. They'd taken out insurance on my life, planning to kill me and collect on both." "This is attempted murder," I said quietly. "Premeditated. They had a backup plan to kill me if the commitment didn't work." "That's why I'm here," Sienna said. "I know I was part of this. I slept with your husband. I moved into your house. I was complicit even if I didn't know the full extent. But Mrs. Ashford, I'm terrified. If Marcus realizes I have these recordings, if he gets out on bail." "He won't," I said firmly. "The moment Detective Inspector Morrison hears these, Marcus's bail will be revoked. And Sienna, these recordings change everything. This isn't just fraud anymore. This is conspiracy to commit murder." "I'll testify," Sienna said, "in court in front of everyone. I'll tell them everything. How Marcus manipulated me, how he planned this for months, how his mother was involved in every step. I need you to know I'm sorry. I was stupid and selfish and I believed his lies because I wanted to. But I'm ready to make it right." I studied her for a long moment. She was young, foolish, and had made terrible choices. But she was also scared, remorseful, and holding evidence that could put Marcus away for life. "I'll drop the civil suit," I said, "on 3 conditions. 1, you testify to everything exactly as it happened. 2, you hand over all 17 recordings to Detective Inspector Morrison today. And 3, you help me find other women Marcus might have targeted." "Other women?" Eleanor discovered that Marcus was engaged to another wealthy woman 8 years ago. She had a suspicious car accident right after her father died. If Marcus has done this before, there might be more victims. Women who were too scared to come forward. But if they see you testifying, see you telling the truth, they might find the courage to speak up too. Sienna nodded vigorously. "I'll do whatever you need. Mrs. Ashford, I know I can't undo what I did, but maybe I can help stop him from ever doing it again. Then we have a deal." I stood, signaling the meeting was over. "Eleanor will coordinate with you and the police. And Sienna, thank you for bringing this to me. You may have just saved other women's lives." After she left, Eleanor immediately called Detective Inspector Morrison. Within 2 hours, He was sitting in my drawing room listening to the recordings, his face growing darker with each word. "This changes everything," he said when the last recording ended. "With this evidence, we're adding attempted murder charges. Both Marcus and Vivian. The life insurance policy shows premeditation. They were planning to kill you from the moment your father was diagnosed." "How long will they get?" I asked. "Life sentences if we're lucky. 25 years minimum." "Mrs. Ashford, I need to ask, are you willing to testify about the time in the psychiatric ward? About what you overheard while you were there?" "Absolutely. I want to tell everyone exactly what they did." "Good, because this is going to be a major trial. High profile. Every newspaper in the country will be covering it. You need to be prepared for that." "I am prepared," I said. "In fact, I'm planning something that will ensure everyone knows exactly what Marcus Ashford is." I told him about the gala, about my plan to bring together survivors, advocates, and media to tell my story publicly before the trial even began. Morrison smiled grimly. "Brilliant. By the time this goes to trial, public opinion will already be on your side. The jury will walk in knowing Marcus is a predator." "That's the idea," I said. "My father taught me that you don't just win battles, you win wars. And this is a war Marcus started the day he decided to steal from me." After Morrison left with Sienna's phone and the insurance policy, Eleanor and I sat in silence for a moment. "Charlotte, I need to tell you something," Eleanor said quietly. "I've been coordinating with Rebecca Thornton. She's agreed to testify about what Marcus did to her. But there's more. She's found 2 other women. Women Marcus dated briefly, women who had money, women who ended relationships with him abruptly after he started asking intrusive questions about their finances." "How many women are we talking about total?" "At least 5, including you and Rebecca. Possibly more that we haven't found yet." 5 women. Marcus had been hunting wealthy women for years, perfecting his technique, learning from his failures. "We need to find them all," I said. "Every single woman he targeted. Because when we walk into that courtroom, I want the prosecutor to show a pattern spanning a decade. I want the jury to see that Marcus Ashford is a serial predator who won't stop until someone stops him." "Then that's what we'll do," Eleanor said. "We'll find every victim, document every crime, and we'll make sure Marcus Ashford never hurts another woman again." That night, I sat alone in my father's study with a glass of whiskey, thinking about the recordings I'd heard, about Marcus planning my death so casually, about Vivian finding a doctor in Switzerland willing to help stage my suicide. They hadn't just wanted to steal from me, they'd been willing to murder me. And if my father hadn't been paranoid enough to set up his investigation, if Professor Chun hadn't gotten me out of that hospital, if Eleanor hadn't helped me, I'd be dead right now, or trapped in that ward forever. But I wasn't dead. I was here, and I was going to make sure everyone knew what Marcus and Vivian had tried to do. The gala was in 8 weeks. The trial would follow shortly after. And by the time I was done, Marcus Ashford's name would be synonymous with evil. He'd tried to bury me. Instead, I was going to bury him. Legally, publicly, completely. And I was going to enjoy every single second of it. Rebecca Thornton walked into Ashford Manor like she owned the world. Tall, elegant, with auburn hair and green eyes that had seen too much but refused to look away. She was 32, wealthy in her own right from her father's estate, and according to Eleanor, she'd spent the last 7 years building a life far away from Marcus Ashford's shadow. We met in the conservatory, surrounded by my mother's orchids, with Eleanor present as witness and support. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," Rebecca said, extending her hand. Her grip was firm, confident. "When Eleanor told me what Marcus did to you, I knew I had to help. Tell me what happened to you," I said. "Everything." Rebecca took a deep breath. "I met Marcus 8 years ago at a charity event. He was charming, attentive, everything you'd want. We dated for 18 months before he proposed. My father didn't like him, said something was off. But I thought Dad was just being overprotective. The parallel to my own story sent chills down my spine. When did things change? When my father was diagnosed with a serious heart condition. Treatable, but Marcus suddenly became very interested in estate planning. He'd ask questions that seemed innocent, about trusts, inheritance, my father's will. Then Dad died unexpectedly. Not from the heart condition, from a stroke. The doctors said it was unrelated, but you had doubts, I finished. Marcus was with him the night he died, brought him his medication, said he wanted to bond with his future father-in-law. 6 hours later, Dad was dead. And within days, Marcus was contacting solicitors about the estate. What happened next? My family blocked him. They didn't trust him, especially my uncle who's a barrister. Marcus couldn't access anything without marrying me first. 2 weeks after the funeral, I was driving home from work. My brakes failed. I went through a red light and was hit by a lorry. The car was destroyed. I should have died. Her voice remained steady, but her hands trembled slightly. I was in a coma for 8 weeks. When I woke up, I had amnesia. Couldn't remember the months before the accident. My family told me Marcus had been trying to visit daily, but they'd banned him. He'd been pressuring doctors about my condition, asking about power of attorney, trying to get access to my finances. The police investigated. They confirmed my brake lines were cut, deliberately, but they couldn't prove who did it. My family suspected Marcus, but we had no evidence. So they paid him off pound 50,000 to walk away and never contact me again. He took the money and disappeared. Until he found me, I said quietly. Until he found you, Rebecca confirmed, and tried the exact same thing. Charlotte, I've lived with guilt for 7 years. I should have reported him, should have warned people, should have done something. But I was scared and traumatized, and I just wanted him gone. You're not responsible for his actions, I said firmly. But Rebecca, we can stop him now. Together. I have recordings of Marcus planning to murder me. Evidence of the life insurance policy. Proof of systematic fraud. And now, with your testimony showing his pattern of behavior, we can prove he's a serial predator. Rebecca's eyes lit with something fierce. What do you need me to do? Testify. Tell your story in court. Show the jury that what happened to me wasn't an isolated incident. It's Marcus's pattern. Find a wealthy woman in crisis. Get close. Wait for an opportunity. Then strike. I'll do it. Gladly. What else? Help me find the others, I said. Eleanor mentioned you'd found 2 more women Marcus targeted? Rebecca nodded. Catherine Wells and Amanda Price. Both dated Marcus briefly 5 and 6 years ago, respectively. Both wealthy. Both ended things abruptly after Marcus started asking invasive questions about their finances. Neither knew about the others until I found them through mutual social connections. Will they testify? I think so, especially now that there's evidence. They both said Marcus made them feel like they were crazy for being suspicious. But seeing your case, seeing the proof, it validates what they felt. Then we need to meet them, all of us together, because I'm planning something bigger than just a trial. I told her about the gala, about my plan to create a public platform for survivors before the trial even began, about building a foundation to help other victims of financial predators and wrongful psychiatric commitment. Rebecca listened intently, and when I finished, she smiled. I'm in, completely. And Charlotte, I want to fund part of it. My father's estate, the one Marcus tried to steal. I want to put it to use stopping other predators like him. You do that. I've been looking for a way to honor my father's memory for years. This is it. We'll create something that protects other women from men like Marcus. Turn our trauma into something meaningful. Over the next 2 hours, we planned. Rebecca would coordinate with Catherine and Amanda. Eleanor would handle the logistics of the gala. I would work with Detective Inspector Morrison on the criminal case. By the time Rebecca left, we'd formed something more than an alliance. We'd created a sisterhood of survivors who'd all been hunted by the same predator and were now joining forces to bring him down. That evening, I received a call from Detective Inspector Morrison. "Mrs. Ashford, I have news. We've charged Marcus and Vivian with attempted murder based on the recordings and the life insurance policy. Both have been denied bail. And Charlotte? The Swiss Dr. Vivian contacted? We found him. He's cooperating with authorities. Turns out he's helped stage several suicides for wealthy clients. He's facing charges in multiple countries." My blood ran cold. They really were going to kill me. They had it planned down to the medication, the timing, everything. If you hadn't gotten out of that hospital when you did. Morrison trailed off. But I did get out. And now they're going to pay for every crime they committed. The trial is set for 3 months from now. The prosecution is building one of the strongest cases I've ever seen. Multiple victims, documented pattern of behavior, physical evidence, recordings, forensic proof. Mrs. Ashford, I've been doing this for 20 years. I've never seen a case this airtight. Good, I said, because I want Marcus Ashford to spend the rest of his life in prison. And I want every woman in Britain to know his face so he can never do this again. After the call, I sat at my father's desk and wrote a list of everyone who'd helped me survive. Professor Chin, Nurse Jennifer Patterson, Eleanor Harding, Rebecca Thornton, Detective Inspector Morrison, Thomas Fairfax, and at the top of the list, my father. He'd known. From the very beginning, he'd seen through Marcus's charm and recognized the predator underneath. And he'd spent his final weeks building a fortress around me that even death couldn't breach. Tomorrow, I'd start planning the gala. In 3 months, I'd testify at the trial. And somewhere in between, I'd make sure Marcus Ashford's name became a warning. But tonight, I raised my glass to my father's portrait and whispered, "Thank you for seeing what I couldn't see, for building the trap that saved my life, for loving me enough to protect me even after you were gone." The portrait didn't answer, but I felt his presence all the same. And I knew that wherever he was proud of what I was building from the ashes of Marcus's betrayal. Not just revenge, justice, legacy, protection for future victims. Marcus had tried to destroy me. Instead, he'd created a force that would destroy predators like him for generations to come. And that was the sweetest revenge of all. The night of the gala arrived with perfect timing. 2 weeks before Marcus's trial was set to begin. The Natural History Museum in London had been transformed into a stunning venue. The main hall with its soaring ceiling and the famous blue whale skeleton overhead now draped in soft lighting and filled with nearly 600 guests. Every major newspaper had sent reporters. BBC, ITV, Sky News, cameras positioned discreetly throughout. Members of Parliament attended. Psychiatric professionals, legal experts, victims' rights advocates, and survivors. So many survivors. I stood backstage in a crimson Alexander McQueen gown. My father's favorite color, the color of courage and power. Eleanor stood beside me, adjusting my diamond necklace. "Are you ready?" she asked. "I've been ready for months," I said. "This is what Dad prepared me for." Through the curtain, I could see the front row. Rebecca Thornton in navy blue, Catherine Wells and Amanda Price, the 2 additional victims we'd found, sitting beside her. Jennifer Patterson, the nurse who'd saved me, Professor David Chin, Thomas Fairfax, Detective Inspector Morrison, and in a specially reserved section, 5 more women who'd come forward after seeing the news coverage. Women Marcus had dated, manipulated, or financially exploited. 8 total survivors ready to share their stories. The only person not in attendance was Marcus. He sat in Belmarsh prison, awaiting trial on charges of attempted murder, conspiracy to defraud, false imprisonment, and administering noxious substances with intent to harm. 11 charges total. Vivian faced 8 charges as his accomplice. The lights dimmed. The room fell silent. I stepped onto the stage to thunderous applause. "Good evening," I began, my voice clear and steady. "My name is Charlotte Ashford. For months ago, my husband drugged me at my father's funeral and had me committed to a psychiatric hospital so he could steal my £12 million inheritance and potentially murder me for life insurance money. Tonight, I'm going to tell you exactly how he almost succeeded and how my father's love saved my life." For 20 minutes, I told my story. Every detail: the drug tea, the staged breakdown, the psychiatric ward, Dr. Whitmore's bribe, the forged diary entries, the mistress in my bed, the life insurance policy, the Swiss doctor who would have staged my suicide. The room was absolutely silent except for my voice and the occasional gasp of horror. "But Marcus Ashford didn't just target me," I continued. "He's a serial predator who's been destroying wealthy women for over a decade. Tonight, some of his other victims have agreed to share their stories, because silence protects predators. Speaking protects victims." Rebecca took the stage. She spoke about her father's mysterious death, the cut-break lines, the 8-week coma, how Marcus had tried to access her estate while she lay unconscious. Catherine Wells followed. She described systematic financial abuse, isolation from family, and how Marcus had convinced her she was mentally unstable before she finally escaped. Amanda Price, then 3 more women. One by one, 8 survivors told their stories. The pattern was devastating and undeniable. By the time the last woman finished, journalists were frantically typing. Camera flashes lit up the room. Several MPs looked visibly shaken. I returned to the stage for closing remarks. "Marcus Ashford will stand trial in 2 weeks on 11 criminal charges," I said. "The evidence against him is overwhelming. But this gala isn't about him. It's about us, the survivors, the women who refused to be erased or silenced." I paused, letting the words sink in. "Tonight, we're launching the Richard Ashford Foundation for Victim Protection and Patient Rights. We'll advocate for stronger protections against wrongful psychiatric commitment. We'll support survivors of financial abuse. We'll educate the public about predatory behavior. And we'll make sure what happened to us never happens to anyone else." Standing ovation. It lasted for 5 full minutes. "There's one more thing," I said when the crowd settled. "Vivian Ashford, Marcus's mother, was his accomplice. She found the corrupt doctor. She researched commitment laws. She located the Swiss doctor to stage my suicide. Women can be predators too, and they'll be held accountable." The applause was deafening. Finally, to anyone watching who might be in a similar situation, trust your instincts. Document everything. Tell someone you trust. Fight back. You're not crazy. You're being targeted. And we're here to help you. The gala raised £2.7 million in one night. Every newspaper ran the story the next day. Heiress exposes serial predator. 8 women testify against Marcus Ashford, the man who hunted wealthy women for their fortune. Marcus's face was on every front page, alongside photos of his victims. The story went viral internationally. CNN picked it up. Australian papers. The story spread across the globe. By the time the trial began 2 weeks later, Marcus Ashford was already convicted in the court of public opinion. The actual trial lasted 4 days. Day 1, the prosecution presented the physical evidence. The teacup with rohypnol residue, the forged diary entries, the £25,000 payment to Dr. Whitmore, the life insurance policy. Day 2, Sienna's recordings played in court. The room listened in shocked silence as Marcus's voice detailed his plan to drug me, commit me, and if necessary, murder me. Day 3, the victims testified. Rebecca described her father's death and the cut-break lines. Catherine explained the financial abuse. I took the stand and walked the jury through every moment of terror in that psychiatric ward. Every conversation I'd overheard, Every plan they'd made while thinking I was unconscious. Day 4. Character witnesses, expert testimony, closing arguments. Marcus's defense tried to argue that I was orchestrating a vendetta, that the other women were lying, that everything was taken out of context. But the evidence was overwhelming. 8 women, documented patterns, physical proof, recordings in Marcus's own voice. The jury deliberated for 2 hours and 43 minutes. Guilty on all 11 counts. At sentencing 3 days later, the judge looked at Marcus with barely concealed disgust. "Mr. Ashford, you are a predator of the worst kind. You systematically targeted vulnerable women, exploited their trust during times of grief, and attempted to destroy their lives for financial gain. You're not just a criminal, you're a danger to society. You will remain so for the foreseeable future." 2 life sentences for attempted murder with a minimum term of 25 years before eligibility for parole. Additional sentences for fraud, false imprisonment, and conspiracy ran concurrent. Marcus would be 70 years old before he could even apply for parole. Vivian received 18 years for her role as accomplice and mastermind. I sat in the gallery with Rebecca, Catherine, Amanda, and the other survivors as the sentences were read. We held hands, 8 women who'd been hunted by the same predator, now bound together by survival and justice. As they led Marcus away in handcuffs, he looked back at me one final time. His face was hollow, defeated. The charming mask had crumbled completely. I smiled at him, not with joy, but with finality. "You lose," I mouthed. He looked away. Outside the courthouse, I stood on the steps with my fellow survivors and made one final statement to the gathered media. Today, justice was served, but this is just the beginning. The Richard Ashford Foundation will continue fighting to protect vulnerable people from predators. To every woman watching, you're not alone. We're here. We'll help you fight back, and we will win. That night, I returned to Ashford Manor, my home, my sanctuary, the place Marcus had tried to steal. I poured a glass of my father's whiskey and stood in his study, looking at his portrait. "We did it, Dad," I whispered. "Marcus is in prison for life. The foundation is launched. 8 women got to see their predator convicted. You taught me to fight smart, not just hard. And it worked." Eleanor appeared in the doorway. "Charlotte, there's someone on the phone for you." Another woman who saw the trial coverage. She says Marcus targeted her 6 years ago. She has evidence. I smiled. The fight wasn't over. More victims were coming forward. More evidence was being uncovered. Marcus's crimes were still being exposed. "Tell her to come to the foundation office tomorrow," I said. "We'll help her file a report. And Eleanor? Make sure Detective Inspector Morrison knows. There might be additional charges." "Will do. Charlotte, your father would be so proud." "I know," I said, looking at the portrait. "I know he would be." The trial was over. Marcus was in prison. But the work had just begun. Because I wasn't just getting revenge anymore. I was building a legacy. 1 year later, I stood in the same cathedral where my father's funeral had taken place. But the occasion couldn't have been more different. The Richard Ashford Foundation's first annual Patient Rights and Victim Protection Award ceremony filled every pew with survivors, advocates, and reformers. Nurse Jennifer Patterson received an award for her whistleblowing that had shut down Hartwell Hospital and resulted in Dr. Whitmore losing his medical license permanently. She now ran the foundation's patient advocacy program, having helped 47 wrongfully committed patients secure their release. Professor David Chun received a Lifetime Achievement Award for his decades of work exposing wrongful psychiatric commitments. Rebecca Thornton was honored for her work establishing support networks for financial abuse survivors. The cathedral was packed, not with mourners this time, but with people celebrating change, justice, and the power of survivors speaking truth. After the ceremony, I hosted a private dinner at Ashford Manor for my closest allies. Eleanor, Rebecca, Catherine, Amanda, Jennifer, Professor Chun, Detective Inspector Morrison, and Thomas Fairfax gathered in the dining room where, 1 year ago, Marcus had drugged my tea and set his plan in motion. Now it was filled with laughter, warmth, and the bonds forged through shared struggle. "A toast," Eleanor said, raising her glass, "to Richard Ashford, who taught his daughter how to be brilliant, patient, and devastatingly effective." "To Richard," we echoed. "And to Charlotte," Rebecca added, "who turned her nightmare into salvation for hundreds of other victims." "To Charlotte," I smiled, feeling the weight of everything we'd accomplished. "Actually, I have a toast. To survivors everywhere who refuse to stay silent. To predators rotting in prison where they belong. And to the fact that Marcus Ashford, who thought he could steal £12 million and murder me, is instead spending the next quarter century in a cell, realizing he catastrophically underestimated Richard Ashford's daughter." Laughter and cheers filled the room. The foundation had grown beyond my wildest expectations. In 1 year, we'd helped 127 people challenge wrongful psychiatric commitments, lobbied Parliament successfully for the Patient Consciousness Protection Act, Ashford's Law, requiring independent psychiatric reviews, trained 312 advocates in recognizing financial abuse and predatory behavior, secured £4.8 million in funding from donors inspired by our story, established partnerships with police departments across the UK to identify and investigate financial predators. Marcus's attempt to destroy me had inadvertently created a movement that was protecting thousands. Later that evening, after everyone had left, I sat alone in my father's study. A letter had arrived that morning. Prison correspondence from Marcus. I'd received 3 over the past year. Each one I'd burned without response. But this one I decided to read. "Charlotte, this is my last letter. I know you won't respond, you never have. But I wanted you to know that I finally understand what I was up against. Your father saw through me from day one, didn't he? Every paranoid precaution, every backup plan, every trap. He knew exactly what I was. And he spent his final weeks ensuring I'd fail. I thought I was the predator. Turns out I was just another rat in Richard Ashford's maze. And he'd already planned every dead end. You were never the weak one. I underestimated you because you were quiet. Thought quiet meant easy. But quiet meant you were listening, watching, learning. I'll be here for at least 25 years. Long enough to fully comprehend that I didn't just lose to you. I lost to both of you. Father and daughter, the perfect team even after death. I hope that brings you satisfaction, because it's all you're getting from me. Marcus." I read it twice, then fed it into the fireplace and watched it burn. Marcus wanted engagement, wanted relevance, wanted to matter even from prison. Instead, I gave him nothing. He'd already lost everything that mattered. His freedom, his reputation, his future. 25 years minimum before he could even apply for parole. He'd be 70 years old, his life essentially over. Meanwhile, I had everything. The foundation was thriving. 8 women had found justice. Hundreds more had been protected. My father's name was now synonymous with protection and love that transcends death. I poured one final glass of whiskey and raised it to my father's portrait. "Thank you, Dad," I said softly, "for seeing the danger I couldn't see, for building the trap I didn't know I'd need, for teaching me that revenge isn't about emotion, it's about strategy, and for loving me enough to protect me even from beyond the grave. Be brilliant," I could almost hear him say. "Be strong. Be careful who you trust. But most of all, be happy." "I am, Dad," I whispered. "I promise. I really am." And I was. Because Marcus had tried to bury me, but he'd forgotten the most important rule. You don't bury Richard Ashford's daughter. You plant her. And I'd grown back stronger, fiercer, more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. The inheritance he'd tried to steal had become a foundation helping thousands. The psychiatric ward he'd trapped me in had inspired nationwide reform. The mistress he'd paraded had become the witness who sealed his conviction. His perfect plan had backfired so spectacularly that my revenge had become legendary. And the best part? I'd done it all legally, methodically, with documentation and the full weight of British law behind me. Marcus had tried to destroy me in shadows. I destroyed him in broad daylight, in front of the entire nation, with 8 other survivors as living proof of his crimes. That's not just revenge. That's legacy. I turned off the lights and walked through Ashford Manor. Truly my home now, every room reclaimed, every memory of Marcus erased and replaced with better ones. Tomorrow I'd wake up and continue the work. More survivors to help, more reforms to champion, more predators to expose. But tonight, I'd sleep peacefully, knowing justice had been served and my father's final gift had worked perfectly. Marcus Ashford tried to steal my inheritance. Instead, he gave me a purpose that would outlive us both, helping survivors for generations to come. The end of his story, the beginning of mine, and what a beautiful beginning it was. If the story moved you, if it reminded you that predators can be stopped and justice can prevail, then smash that subscribe button right now. Ring the bell. Share this with everyone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and whether you've ever dealt with a predator like Marcus. Remember, if someone is trying to isolate you, control you, steal from you, you're not crazy. You're being targeted. Document everything. Tell someone you trust. Fight back. You're stronger than you think. Smarter than they believe. Capable of more than they imagine. This was Charlotte Ashford's story of revenge, justice, and legacy. Thank you for staying until the end. Now go remind any predators in your life that you're not prey. You're a force of nature, and forces of nature are unstoppable.